law. It's important. And we should be able to trust our Department of Justice. We should be able, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, or you are part of the Green Party, or you don't want to be a part of a party at all, whether you're a libertarian, I don't care who you are. You should be able to say, for the most part, that Lady Justice is blind, that we live in a nation where we can get representation, and that we should be able to entrust that our departments, the Department of Justice, our bureaucracy, is being run ethically, that we are not some kind of backwards banana republic, that we should never even give the illusion that we are, because the rest of the world is watching us. We're a beacon of light, right? We're supposed to be a beacon of hope for people all over the world searching for freedom. And I'm sorry, but I go through social media. I'm hearing what people are saying to me on the street. I'm listening to conversations around the dinner table, and America is fracturing. That is a fact. America is fracturing. People don't trust our DOJ anymore. For crying out loud, there was memos. Merrick Garland had memos on parents in Virginia and Loudoun County where the DOJ was, allocating them under the term domestic terrorist because they were trying to defend their children in school systems that have been overtaken by a woke left, by a Marxist ideology that wants to do everything to separate the child from the parent. And we live in a country where our founding fathers said, hey, look, Congress, if things aren't going right in your bureaucracies, then you have oversight over them. Bring them in, question them. Don't fund them. Don't fund them if they are out of line, if they're going off on tangents, if they are doing things that are un-American. But we're not doing that. We have lots of hearings. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but a lot of times I wonder if these hearings are just for show. We are seeing what is happening to our country. President Trump being indicted on what is an alleged misdemeanor by a DA who is certainly political and has politicized his office. The district attorney of Manhattan is definitely a politicized office, and he is targeting President Trump for political purposes. And that scares me. We are opening up Pandora's box. We're opening up Pandora's box, and it is just wildfire that is spreading across our nation. And that's why I've brought on former Attorney General of Arizona, Mark Brnovich, to the show so he can talk to us about this, because he can really analyze it and break it down for us, and in a way that is in layman's terms, not with politicking, but in layman's terms, really what is happening to our country and why we are suffering so much right now, and why our justice system is falling apart, and what we have to do as a nation to rebuild that and to fix that. I'm terrified when I think about the future, the way it is, the direction that we're taking right now. I know it terrifies you. There are so many people, I know this happens to you. Walk down the street or you're talking to friends and they're saying, what's going to go on here? Why is this happening? Other nations, people from other countries are calling me saying the same thing. Afghanistan. I got to tell you, my husband and I, the biggest issue for the Afghan people, the reason why it was so difficult to get anything done in Afghanistan, that whole rebuilding, nation state building, all of that fell apart because of corruption. People weaponizing the system against their political opponents, Karzai fighting with Abdullah, governors inside these small provinces that really were already struggling because their illiteracy rate was, 80%. And we were dumping money into these areas where it was mainly farmers who were then losing their land because judges were corrupt. They didn't trust the system. They didn't trust the judicial system. They would have rather gone to the Taliban and gone back to the old Sharia law ways because they felt like, well, okay, at least here, I might not like the Taliban. I might not like what they're doing to my people, but they're not going to steal my land. They're not going to utilize a system against me. At least that's what they thought. This is a very dangerous precedent that is being set in the United States, in which we take a world leader, not because of a real crime. I mean, we're seeing that even with President Biden. You want to see real issues that need to be investigated? Look at China, Ukraine, and the amount of money that went to the Bidens. That's a real issue. But they're digging up some old dirt on Trump and targeting him. It's election interference. It is an abuse of our judicial system. And it is raising doubt in the hearts of Americans and in the hearts of others, foreigners, wondering, wow, what is happening to this country, to this beautiful experiment? You know, the experiment that says every individual has a right, a God-given right to be free, to have liberty, to not have the government direct and rule us the way we see things in Venezuela, in Cuba, the history of the USSR. We're watching what's happening in Russia now. The government should not have this much power over us. And these crazy extremist groups, whether they're on the right or the left, but they should not have a say over our children. They should not have a say over our lives. They should allow us to continue to flourish as a nation the right way. But we know what's happening here. And that's what I'm going to talk to Attorney General Brnovich about. What is happening in our country? What can we do to solve it? What are we really seeing when it comes to this indictment? There's also a case, United States versus Hanson. It's an immigration case that is in the Supreme Court. I'm going to ask him a little bit about that. I'm going to talk to him about his trip to Montenegro, this amazingly beautiful country, beautiful, gorgeous country across from Italy that almost everyone I talk to about, I'm like, have you guys ever heard of Montenegro? Have you ever been there? They're like, no, I don't even, what, Montenegro, is that a country? Where? You know, I'm going to tell you about it. You're going to want to go there. You're going to want a vacation there. It's amazing. But before I get there, I want to tell you about fast growing trees. So the news is too much, and I live my life in the news, right? Because it's my work. So sometimes I just got to take a break. I want to go outside. I want to be in my garden. I want to get my hands in the soil. I want to take a break. And that is where fast growing trees comes in. It is an amazing product, an amazing business. And it allows you to plant the most beautiful plants for your area of the country. And you do it not by going out and hiring a nursery and having them come over to your house and spending thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. They do it right online. They say, okay, hey, you live in this part of Texas. These are the plants that will flourish in your area. And this is what you need to do to make them flourish. And then you can order those plants online. FastGrowingTrees.com's plants experts actually curate thousands of easy to grow plant, shrub, and tree varieties for your unique climate. Meyer lemons to evergreens and everything in between, folks. Join over the 1.5 million happy fast growing tree customers. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com/Carter now and get 15% off your entire order. Get 15% off fastgrowingtrees.com/Carter, fastgrowingtrees.com/Carter. So I'm so excited. I have Attorney General Brnovich on the other line. He's just waiting to talk about all these topics. And, you know, I have had him on my show many times before, and I just love it because we have similar interests. I love science. I love space. I also love science fiction. I'm a big Star Wars fan. Yeah, I know there's some of you out there that aren't, but I am. I'm just not totally happy with the direction of some of our Star Wars stars are taking from the past, Luke, for example. But I put up with it because I think it's a great storyline. And Attorney General Brnovich is the one person that can pretty much break everything down, like I said at the top of the show, into layman's terms so that we understand it. Okay, so we haven't talked in a little while, Attorney General Brnovich, and I mean, so much has happened since you left office. And by the way, so much is happening right now. And that's why I brought you back, because I want to catch up with you. I know you're my Star Wars fan. You're my only fan that I have on the show that actually is that actually is a Star Wars and a techie fan, and that I bring onto the show. Maybe next time, maybe when I bring Jeremy or some of the UFO guys, Nick Pope, he might be one, but
Yeah,
you are it right now. You are my educated Star Wars fan. So right now I feel like I'm living in a Star Wars movie, like a movie like with the Death Star and everything. I'm watching what is happening to President Trump, and I'm like, I can't believe it. I just can't believe how far the left has gone. And I actually had this like kind of epiphany last night. I was thinking about it, with the indictment. And I remember when everybody was like on the right saying, lock her up. It was that whole Hillary Clinton mess, lock her up. I pictured Hillary Clinton like sitting in her lair or somewhere, in New York going, I'm not going to get locked up. You're going to get locked up. I feel like this is like this crazy political game that's being played. I mean, but to the point where it's really tearing America apart at the seams. And that scares me.
Yeah, I think it should scare everyone, every American. And I know you and I have talked before, even privately, publicly about our backgrounds. And one of the things about people that have not just studied history but lived it, or their families have, is you understand that any government that's big enough to give you everything is big enough to take it away. And that's why folks like you and I, whose family had experiences living under communist governments, these tyrannical governments, where basically whoever was in power could intimidate you and arrest their political opponents. And what has happened? What has happened in the last few years, I've talked a lot about, is that one is the far left, years ago started incorporating, the Sal Alinsky's rules for radicals into politics, right?
Right.
And these are old Marxist notions, and part of that is that you have to define, demonize, and then destroy your political opponents. And so that's one of the reasons why in the last few years especially, but even the last few decades, we've seen this really ramped up where if you disagree with someone on the left, it's not just enough for them to win the argument or win an election. They want to cancel and destroy you. And we've seen this. And I know we're going to talk about, what's going on right now in New York, and be safe while you're there. But the thing is we got to put this in context, the broader context of what's happening. You see it in cancel culture, where you have this, theory that if you don't agree with the dominant far left progressive agenda, you will lose your job or lose your livelihood. During the COVID lockdown, I was very proud that I filed the very first lawsuit challenging Joe Biden's vaccine mandate, because once again, you cede that authority to the federal government, you're not going to get it back. And I was hammered by local media and even some national media as, being anti-science, whatever. But no, I always said I was pro-Constitution. So we all have to understand that as principled rule of law conservatives, the context of what's going on here. And this is just the push for the neo-Marxist Sal Alinsky ideology. And part of what that is that you have to destroy, you demonize, and then you destroy anyone that disagrees with you politically. And that's, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no. And I was going to say, Mark, that's exactly what happened under Stalin, his head of the Secret Service, Lavrentiy Pavlovich. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. It has been a long time since I've taken my course in Soviet studies at UCLA, but, show me the man and I'll show you the crime, and that's what we're seeing now with the weaponization of our bureaucracy. And I remember, and I'll say this again, Doug, I know you're out there and I know you listen to me, but this friend of mine, Doug, years ago when I worked at the Daily Bulletin in Ontario, he reached out to me, and he was actually an intelligence officer that worked in Moscow. And one of the things that he had told me, and we became friends. He had seen the stories I broke on United States citizenship and immigration services, and how it was just being decimated from the inside, and people were getting, there were contractors that were bringing people into the United States, and there were whistleblowers coming out and reporting on all these incidents post, September 11th. And the reason I bring this up is I remember what Doug said to me. He had studied, he was in the Soviet Union. He had worked there forever. He had studied Soviet policy and politics. He understood how Soviet intelligence apparatus operated. And he said, the biggest story in the United States right now, and the one that is going to come back and haunt us, is the overtaking of the bureaucracy by the left. They are decimating the internal organism of the United States, our organs, what makes us whole, what allows us to operate as a republic. And lo and behold, everything he has said has come to fruition. I mean, I really feel like it has.
It's funny. I hadn't thought about this till you just mentioned that, but you and I have talked about this off the air before, but Milovan Djilas was he was a partisan. He rode with Tito in the former Yugoslavia. He was a hardcore communist. In fact, one of his books is called Conversations with Stalin because he studied in the Soviet Union in the 1930s. And so when Yugoslavia became a communist state, he became the vice president. And after a few years, he became very disillusioned. And he wrote a book called The New Class. And what he realized is that there's these bureaucratic classes that end up developing in every system of government that essentially end up taking control. And so, the old communists used to fight about the bourgeois versus the proletariat. And he came to realize that there was this bureaucratic class that ended up giving themselves all the benefits that, exploited the people essentially. And what ended up happening is he got a 7-year prison sentence and he ended up, being exiled, and he came to the United States and wrote some more books. But I think about that book. It's been a few years since I read it, but I think that maybe that's one of those books that we all need to rediscover, because I know that even when I chaired Governor Brewer's Privatization and Efficiency Commission years ago, and one of the recommendations we made is to get rid of civil service protection for, these career government bureaucrats, because it's hard to fire them. Once they're in, they become a permanent bureaucratic class. And I know that even when I was state gaming director, I tried to implement some reforms and people would drag their feet. And, finally, one of the division chiefs or the deputy chief, who I knew for years, a retired Phoenix police officer, told me that people say, look, we've outlived 3 or 4 directors. We can outlive Brnovich. And so you end up with this permanent class, almost like a Praetorian Guard, when it comes to some of these federal law enforcement agencies. And, when it comes to like Department of State, the EPA, you end up with these, people that think they know best, that are unresponsive. And so they end up undermining whoever the new president is. So it doesn't matter whether you're Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush or even Donald Trump. When you have this permanent political class, these apparatchiks and these agencies that you can't fire, that have a hard left agenda, that think they're the keepers of the gates, the keys, they systematically undermine whoever's in power. And we saw this during the Trump administration when it came to the EPA and environmental regulations. We've seen it with the State Department and, their agenda, all over the world. And, you see it now at the Department of Justice, where there's one set of rules for leadership. And, there's a lot of the line level agents that I know that I've worked with over the years are very frustrated. And they will tell you confidentially, if you're having coffee with them, how frustrated they are at leadership. And, we're talking about President Trump and Hillary Clinton, and nowhere does it manifest itself more than that. I remember when I know how hard it was to get a wiretap, because I'm a former federal prosecutor. And when I heard that the Obama administration, his DOJ, had gotten a wiretap on the major presidential candidate, I remember I told people, I said, well, they better have like video and audio. There is no way you can get a wiretap and go to a FISA court unless you're lying to them because it's purely political motivated. And I think we know now, when you go back in retrospect, that was kind of the beginning of really the blatant outward, bureaucratic apparatchik state thinking that they can do whatever they want. I mean, think about this, Sarah. You were talking about he was at that time the nominee of the Republican Party against the Democratic nominee. I mean, one of those two people is going to be the next president of the United States. And people in our federal government thought it was okay to basically go to a court with some trumped up BS dossier.
It was a lie. This is what I don't understand, because if I call right now the police and I dox someone, or whatever that word is that they're using now. What is that? There's a legal word where if I'm gonna send police over to somebody's house,
Yeah.
and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but
But
if I
like swatting them or something like that.
swatting, that's it. So if I decide I'm going to swat someone and the cops find out that I've done that, I would think I could get arrested, right? Like if I'm going to swat, especially let's say the mayor of my town, or I mean somebody could die, right? So I could be arrested. If I need to run an operation and I'm a CIA officer and I decide, you know what? The only way we're really going to get, let's say, Saddam Hussein is if we run a disinformation operation against him, and my team believes that this will, implode his government and force him out. We'll find a way to get him. I have to get a signature from the president of the United States. That is a lethal force operation, because now I am telling lies or over exaggerations about a world leader, and I'm putting it out there in the media. I mean, it's an operation of war. But our own people, Mark, our own government ran a disinformation campaign based off of complete and utter lies in a dossier. Just lied about a president, lied about him to the whole world. And it's now culminating in another attack where he is being indicted for something from his past that is like, I thought non-disclosure agreements were legal. I thought they were. I know Clinton had them on someone that worked for her, and she did it with her funds, to pay somebody off. I don't understand how this is happening.
Well, look, we know this, and I think sometimes, some of us that believe so strongly in the institutions and the rule of law, we don't want to believe this is happening. And I know as a lifelong prosecutor, look, I was a state gang prosecutor. I was an assistant United States attorney. I was a federal prosecutor. I prosecuted the 2 largest gambling crimes in Arizona history. I've done federal wiretaps. I mean, I used to sign off on all the state wiretaps when I was the attorney general, including doing more DEA cases in Arizona than the feds were doing because we did them well. And the reality is that when you're a prosecutor, and this goes back to our conversation about the power of government, you can take away people's livelihood, their life, liberty, property. So it's an awesome responsibility. And I always tell people, I told young prosecutors, I always told agents, officers, you don't throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. Ethically, as a prosecutor, you can only bring charges. You're only supposed to bring charges when you have a reasonable likelihood of conviction. So you have to consider all those ethical rules when we look at what this New York indictment is all about. Because the reality is essentially you have, allegedly, 2 tracks of hush payments to individuals.
Hush puppies would be better.
Yes. But when you think about it, you sit there when you're a prosecutor, you have limited resources.
Right,
and so
right.
There's the hypocrisy of the New York district attorney and even AG that they won't prosecute violent crimes that actually affect people's everyday lives, that affect the economy. But now they're going to go after essentially paper crime involving something that happened literally years ago and arguably is a federal law that they've kind of shoehorned on. There's issues now related to the that I'm sure President Trump's lawyers can argue about dealing with the statute of limitations. So there's all these legal flaws in it. And so, once again, as a prosecutor, I would take a step back. If one of my young prosecutors came to me and I'd be like, look, there's no reasonable likelihood of conviction. Are these theories of this case going to withstand the scrutiny of a $1,000 an hour defense attorney? Are they going to be, is this something that's going to be overturned on appeal? Is this something that a jury, even in New York, remember, they've got to be unanimous, that you're going to get everybody unanimously agree upon. So if there is not a reasonable likelihood of conviction, you are not supposed to bring that case. And I just think objectively, and I was a damn good prosecutor, objectively, whether this was a Democrat or Republican, it is a dangerous precedent when we start going after major candidates and literally the former president of the United States. So not only is
we're done. We're done, Mark, because let me tell you, this is going to happen over and over again. And I know this is going to happen over and over again. This is the operation in process. We've seen with the FISA court, for all you out there, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, even chided the Obama administration. I mean, at the end of the Obama administration, they basically went up to the court and said, hey, guess what? mea culpa, but we expanded the laws. So now we're listening in on reporters' conversations, attorney-client privilege conversations, priests and rabbis, and maybe the imam here and there. It's like mea culpa, mea culpa. And then the FISA court's like, oh, wait a minute. You came to us now to tell us that you expanded your powers. That is not okay. But my thing is this, Mark, if every bureaucracy, if there's not, the only one that counts to me here is our Department of Justice. That's why I have so much respect for you. I know you understand the law here. The DOJ it's like where the buck stops in America, in my opinion. The buck stops at the Department of Justice. But if the Department of Justice is no longer justice, what are we? I mean, when we won't be able to stop it. It's a machine out of control.
And it's one of the reasons why, look, I mean, when I was still Attorney General, I wrote letters to Merrick Garland, very critical of the fact that he was talking about investigating parents as possibly domestic terrorists with everything else that's going on in our country. And so we are unfortunately, yes, exactly. And so we are seeing the Federal Department of Justice, obviously the leadership, becoming much more politicized and weaponized, as we've talked about before. But this is also why, and this is another podcast for another day, why I'm always a big believer in decentralization of power, limited federal government. And part of even what the Republicans have done historically is that, whether it's education, where, they argue, hey, these Republicans are out there saying they want to spend more money on education and expand the Department of Education or spend money on local police grants, whatever it is. The problem with that is that when you're voting for, more resources for the local police department, then the Department of Justice gets more oversight over them. And then what we've seen happen is then the Department of Justice comes in and tries to take over local police department over alleged, civil rights violations. And so Department of Education, they get all this pot of money, the federal government, and they go to the states and local, districts and say, oh, if you're not teaching critical race theory or the 1619 Project, you're not going to get your own money back. And so that's why, as Republicans, as conservatives, we need to take a step back and say, whoa, wait a minute. The federal government is, as Ronald Reagan used to say, is not the solution. It is the problem. And we need people in Washington, D.C., especially the Republicans, to say, stop. No, we're not going to give that power. And where, I know Jim Jordan and Kevin McCarthy are doing stuff in the House trying to do these oversight committees. But my goodness, this is where they have the ability to call these people in that are running DOJ, that are running, EPA, the State Department, and call them in, hold them to task, and stop voting to fund them.
That's it. Absolutely. And I feel like they're so scared to do that. It's like everybody gets to the edge, like, we're going to have a hearing and we're going to hold everyone accountable. And then all of a sudden they call in a few witnesses and everybody says, we're really mad about this. And then the hearing goes away. It's like a closed hearing. Everybody leaves, it's like, okay, but we held a hearing. No, we have to do. That's why the Constitution was set up the way it was set up. That's what our founding fathers saw. They want peaceful transitions of power, I believe. And they did then. It want a nation that's stable, but it requires to have a little bit of guts. You have to be willing to say, no, I want to talk to you, Merrick Garland. I want you in front of me and I want to figure out what's going on here and why you're doing this and why you think this is okay. I'll be back in a moment with the Attorney General, but first I want to share one of my favorite companies with you, and that's Allegiance Gold. Yes, Allegiance Gold. They will help you diversify all of your investments. And why do I say that? Because banks right now, my gosh, you can't even trust them. You don't even know when a bank is going to come down on you because it doesn't agree with your ideology. We saw that happen with Don Jr. And his company. We also saw it happen with Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. We saw it with the truckers in Canada during the protests where the Canadian government seized their bank accounts. But guess what? You don't have to just rely on the Biden administration or on your bank. You can diversify right now, and you can get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sara sent you, that I sent you to Allegiance Gold. My friends at Allegiance Gold right now can help you protect your IRA, your 401k with physical gold and silver. And guess what? You can have it delivered securely right to your front door. How awesome is that? Get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sara sent you. So don't wait. Call or click today. That's 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-7272. Sara, S-A-R-A, or go to protectwithsara.com. We can't control the Biden administration, folks, but we can prepare. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, S-A-R-A, or protectwithsara.com. Hey, folks, if you liked today's show with Attorney General Brnovich, please subscribe to my channel right here on YouTube and on Rumble. Thanks so much. Another thing that came up was the whole issue with Hanson, the United States versus Hanson, the immigration issue before the Supreme Court. Talk a little bit about that, why as Americans we should pay attention to this, and why more reporters should be writing about this, because it really is so significant.
Well, this was a case that was argued at the U.S. Supreme Court at the end of March. And it was a case where we led the effort urging the court to accept the case, because what happened was an individual was convicted under federal law. This is during the Trump administration, of course, not the Biden administration. During the Trump administration, individual was convicted of violating the federal law that said if you solicit and induce someone to either break our immigration laws or stay in the country illegally for profit, it's a crime. It's a felony. And so he was convicted. And of course, the Ninth Circuit here in, on the West Coast, overturned that conviction. And the case went up to the Supreme Court. And, what we argued in that case, what our office did when we were still part of it, when I was still part of the office, they've changed a lot of positions now since I've left, but it was basically that, look, in any other context, whether it's drugs or even crimes like prostitution, if you are paying someone, essentially inducing them for profit to break the law, we all recognize that that's not protected by the First Amendment, that that's a crime. Even the Supreme Court has recognized that in the past. And so really what you have is a group of liberal groups, left-wing activists that have said that law is unconstitutional because it impedes on people's First Amendment rights. And it's really a ridiculous argument. And it was pointed out in the briefs, even this last week or so, when the case was argued, that the U.S. has had some form of this law for 140 years on the books. And no one out there is being prosecuted for posting something on a website saying, hey, we need more immigration or whatever it is. And because the reality is that, as you know, the Biden administration has systematically decriminalized and incentivized people breaking the law. And that's why we see these record number of people coming here. I mean, I know you've covered this on television. You and I've talked about it before, but we all get numb to the numbers. But even now, recently, this past week, DHS acknowledged that only 5 to 10% of the fentanyl that comes into this country is being stopped. So we know just last year enough fentanyl was seized to potentially kill every single person in this country. So
think about that, and that's only 5 to 10% of it.
And so, and we know that 100,000 people die. So people are dying every day. And as I've talked about, even with you over the last couple of years,
and people are being murdered every day, because there are people that are addicts, and then there are people that are taking pills that are counterfeit all over our streets and may have no idea. They take one from a friend and they're like, here, have a Percocet. You're going to feel better. Your back is hurt, you're whatever. And they die. So to me, that's murder.
Decisions at a party and they think it's Adderall or something. And yeah, no, it's so Americans are dying every day. I mean, it's one of the leading causes of death now, in places like Arizona amongst our young people. And so every state's a border state. But what I wanted to make sure that everyone understands, I'm a first generation American. This isn't about, whether we should or shouldn't have X number of immigrants in this country. What it's about is we have to have a lawful process, a lawful procedure. You can't have anarchy and chaos, because when you do, the cartels, they've essentially seized operational control of our southern border. And I worry Mexico's on the brink of becoming a failed state. And I don't say that lightly, but every single we know that now there's estimates, law enforcement, that about every single day the cartels are making $14 million just off people entering illegally. And then they're making billions of dollars off all the drugs that are flowing into our country, which China's supplying the precursor chemicals. So the cartels are becoming wealthier, more powerful, and they are destabilizing the government of Mexico. And that will have major consequences beyond and above what we're seeing right now.
So I don't think I've told you this yet, but this is my children's book, Joining the Amazing Club, Awesome Sauce. And it's part of the Brave book series. And it's about following the rules. And it's all about this. It's telling the story of the border without the horrors of it for children, but talking about how when you join a club, this really cool club, you follow the rules, you do it the right way so you're protected and the people who are trying to get into the club are protected. It's just a way of, do you think we've really forgotten what the basic concepts of humanity? I mean, there's so much weird gray space where everybody is just saying we could do whatever we want and there are no real consequences to anything, and we're watching this kind of craziness go on, and children and adults and people are paying the price. They're dying, drugs are coming into our country, our system is turned inside out basically, and our children really they need to be safe. They need to feel safe. And I feel like we're creating a world for them that is very unsafe.
Yeah, and the double-edged sword to that is that on the one hand, and you know, I know my own daughters, and they're great, you know, well-adjusted, you know, straight A students, and you know, very respectful and caring of other folks, and they're amazing human beings. But I remember, you know, even during the COVID lockdown, I mean, you know, my daughter was working, my oldest daughter was working, and you know, her college roommate said, "Well, you're so dumb because you can get money for free," and she's like, no, it's not free. My parents pay taxes, and one day we're going to pay taxes. And I bring up that anecdote because during the COVID lockdown, you saw so many of these young people, especially like in their late teens, early 20s, that were petrified, like, oh my God, Joe Biden's going to tell us when it's safe. So they rely on the government for that. The federal government is making people dependent on the federal government financially. And then meanwhile, that on an individual basis, I think that there's a lot of younger people that don't think for themselves and don't understand what their obligations are, that you do things, you do the right thing in the right way, not because Uncle Joe Biden tells you, but because those are your morals and your values. And well, I was literally just in Europe spending some time there. I was taking some time off doing some writing. And
Montenegro. I mean, I'm so excited. I love this. I want to go there. You made me want to.
Well, and I was going to say is that one of the things I kept saying when I was there, because people would ask about the United States, what's going on? And, you know, people are like fascinated by, you know, the indictments and, you know, what's going on with the president and why not Hillary Clinton? So, you know, there's people all over the world that see like this kind of hypocrisy and they think like, wait a minute, when you guys start arresting elected officials or politicians, that's when you start becoming like third world countries. And, you know, people expect better of us. And one of the things that I kept saying is there's an old quote by Chesterton that when man ceases to believe in God, he doesn't believe in nothing. He will believe in anything. And I think right now, and the point I was getting at, even with, you know, the Uncle Joe stuff, and this goes back to the neo-Marxist notion, is that there's people on the far left that want to undermine, you know, the family. They want to undermine our values. They all want to undermine our individual collectivism, or individual obligation to each other, like Tocqueville talked about. And they want us relying on a central authority where we become dependent on them for telling us when it's safe, when it's not, dependent on them economically. And that's what we're seeing is this concentration of power in DC. And if you don't agree with it, they will crush you. They will either crush you professionally or they'll go after you criminally.
And that's, I mean, and this is like far beyond what we've seen in the past. We've seen that crazy house of cards in DC in the past. We've seen people go after each other or, you know, sling mud in the media. I've just never seen it to this level, this type of hatred. I've never seen anything quite like it. And I want to make one correction. I said Lavrenti Pavlovich, but his last name was Pavlovich, but Buria. So anybody out there who wants to, you know, who might say, well, that isn't his whole name. Pavlovich was his middle name and Buria was his last name. That was Stalin's head of the, you know, his secret police he would send out and you know, send to do his dirty work. And that's something that does scare me as a daughter, first generation as well as of a Cuban immigrant who watched as her, you know, her country, my mother's country, turned into a communist state, which it still is, and freedoms were taken away and the government became everything. And now I'm watching my country. And I guess maybe the last words of wisdom, I know you had so much fun in Montenegro and I can't wait. I myself will make sure that I take a trip there with my family. And you and I got to talk about that. But why is the rule of law so important, Mark? Why is it that this is fundamentally, I believe, the spirit of our nation? one of the most important pieces of a republic is the rule of law. I remember Afghanistan. People would say to me, why do the people trust the US troops or trust their, the government that's in place? And I would say because their judicial system is broken, because they can't go to the court and trust that the judge isn't paid off by another guy and that they're going to lose their land, because they can't believe in the people who have been elected to power, because they don't believe that election really mattered, that it was, that there was something wrong with it. That's why the Afghan people had such a hard time, developing any kind of trust. So when you think of America and you think of our DOJ and rule of law, explain to me and explain to those who, all of you out there who are listening, all of them, why this is so important.
Well, I had never run for any office. I ran for AG, and a lot of the local media used to attack me because I used to always talk about the fact that when you see Lady Justice, traditionally she has a blindfold because justice is supposed to be blind. That every case is no case should be judged on what a person's name is or what their ethnicity is or what their background is. What it should be judged under is, what does the law say? And so the rule of law is all about having consistency and certainty in the application of the law, so everyone knows they will get a fair shake, that Lady Justice will have a blindfold on, and that based on the merits of your case and not what your economic or social or ethnic background is, that will not have an effect. Now, why is that important? Because you need consistency and certainty under the law for not only people to thrive as individuals and to have hope, but you also economically need that because, you allude to what was going on in Afghanistan. And I used to tell this anecdote all the time. In the early 90s, there was a major earthquake in Southern California, the Northridge quake. And, tragically, about 63 people died. Around that same time, there was an earthquake in Pakistan, Islamabad, and 60,000 people died. And why was that? It was because in countries like Afghanistan, or Pakistan even, where you can bribe people, where there's so much corruption, you end up having people that do not invest in their property and they don't invest in shacks, they make shacks, they don't invest in property. And when you can bribe people, then you end up with things that are built haphazardly or not up to code. And when there's a disaster, that's why you see so much death and tragedy. Now, I know this is kind of the Brnovich is off on tangents again, but stick with me, folks. This is what I'm getting at, is that when you know or you do not have the ability to own something, there's no incentive. If the government can arbitrarily take it away, or the government can arbitrarily pick winners and losers in the marketplace, or if you know you're not going to get a fair shake in the courtrooms, there's no incentive for you to invest your time and money in whether it's a business or a property. It's really haphazard. And then that leads to gray and black markets. And ultimately, one of the great things about the United States is because we believe in property rights, we believe in the rule of law. That means someone like me, you can go from one generation, your family fleeing communism. Sorry, there's a bug flying around. I can one generation fleeing communism to being, the state's attorney general. And we, like my wife and I, have been very fiscally responsible, but we live in a house where we have now a lot of equity. And, my mom lives in a house where she, owns it outright now, and she worked hard. And so, if you do not have the rule of law, if you don't have that consistent and certain application, it affects you not only politically, it's not only demoralizing, but it also has this great economic effect. And we need the rule of law to encourage people to want to take their time and their money and invest in businesses or properties because they know that they'll get a fair shake and that some government isn't going to arbitrarily, take it away or give somebody else an advantage that you work so hard for. And then once you have that equity, then that means that you can borrow against it, or you have an incentive to invest even more or to keep it improved. And so it's not haphazard. So when there's an earthquake or disaster, it won't fall apart. Hope that makes sense.
It does. And it makes sense even in because I like the way you put it. It's real tangible, right? And if we don't have that rule of law, and if our nation can't trust our leadership and our bureaucracy, and if Lady Justice is peeking underneath her, her blindfold and assisting one political party instead of another, and operating as a robot of sorts for, for these political parties, then we really are in a lot of trouble. I mean, America is, that's the reason why people come from all over the world, Mark. People try. I get why they want to come through that border. I get why my mom wanted to come here. I get why your parents wanted to come here. But if we keep showing ourselves to the world this way, I don't know if we're going to survive this if we can't fix our bureaucracy.
Yes, and the very reason why people want to come here is being undermined by the far left and the Democrats, because they're essentially creating lawlessness and they're decriminalizing activity, and you're creating this bureaucratic state which is picking winners and losers and literally investigating people that are their political opponents. And so the very reason why people want to come here is being eroded before our very eyes. But one of the things I wanted to say that when you were talking, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but even bringing this back to what we were first talking about with President Trump, one of the things that I will tell you as a prosecutor, in a case like this where it's going to be so high profile, it was a little thing, but my understanding is that the judge that essentially the DA picked out and that they brought the grand jury stuff to is someone that's been involved in other litigation or apparently is maybe, anti-President Trump or anti-Trump organization. To me, that was a dumb move. And not only does that create potential issues for appeal, but it also sets up this optics. When we're talking about the rule of law and what other people think about this country, is you don't want to get into this kind of lane where people all over the world and half this country thinks, aha, the fix is in. Look, they took it to this judge who's anti-Donald Trump. And so if it were me and I was a prosecutor, if you think your case is that strong, I'd have gone out of my way to bring it to someone who was a Republican judge or someone that didn't have any sort of history with the Trump organization, because I think that undermines the credibility of your case. And in cases like this, where you're going after a former president who's the leading Republican candidate right now,
right?
I think it undermines a lot. It undermines not only your credibility, but quite frankly, I think it devalues what this country stands for.
I absolutely think that's what's happening. I've been hearing that from people in other parts of the world, sources of mine, also from people in the United States. And for everyone out there, that judge is Juan Manuel Marchand. And President Trump said, the judge, he made this statement. He wrote, "The judge assigned to my witch hunt case, a case that has never been charged before, hates me. His name is Juan Manuel Marchand, and he was handpicked by Bragg and the prosecutors." And I think President Trump knows that that judge really is someone that will not look with blindfolds. Maybe that's what he's saying. Somebody that already has animus towards him, who has enough, anger towards the president and no objectivity to actually handle this case.
Right. And what I'm getting at, Sarah, I'm married to a judge, so I'm very careful what I say about judges. What I'm saying is it's the appearance. And this is one thing even judges know about.
That's right.
That you have to avoid the appearance of impropriety. You have to avoid a situation.
Even if he's great, even if he's a great judge.
I don't know him. I've never met him. But the fact that Bragg picked him out, and apparently there's some history, that to me would be a reason for a judge to recuse him or herself and say, you know what? The optics of this don't look good. I don't want to be involved in this. I don't want to become a distraction or an issue on appeal. And that's what's happening now.
Gosh, I could talk to you forever, Mark. And I know your wife is right there. You guys are probably heading to dinner or doing something with the kids. I thank you so much. Thank you for letting me keep you here much longer than I had planned. And because I think this is such an important topic. And I know everyone out there who's listening is probably thinking the exact same, like, oh, I'm so glad I heard him out on this, because you're the best person to explain this. I haven't met anyone in law as good as you at explaining things in layman's terms. Like if I ever decide to go to law school, I hope you'll have to have an online class though, because I'm in Texas, but I will take it.
That is so nice of you to say it. So please tell Marty, everyone else I said hello. And I'm definitely big fan of Montenegro, and it's an amazing country. We barely got to touch on it. I just got back from there. I was just there, and it is the irony. This is the last thing. I'm sorry, I don't sound like a prosecutor getting the last word in now. But the thing about Montenegro, this is the irony. They just had an election this past Sunday. The person that won is part of the Europe Now party. He's very pro-West. And I've known folks there and I've met with them. And the irony is they want to do more for the rule of law. They want to attract Western investment. They want to, be on the cutting edge of, fintech sandboxes and, eliminating regulations to attract Western capital. And so Montenegro is right there on the Adriatic. It's right by Croatia. It's got a great climate, amazing place in the summer. And now they're serious about trying to, reestablish the rule of law and attract Western capital. So I think it's on the brink of becoming a major player in the world.
Everyone will know where Montenegro is on a map in the upcoming years. And we'll probably all just be hanging out there in the summer. It's probably going to be the new vacation hotspot.
Don't ruin it. We got to keep it a secret.
I know. Well, don't worry about it. We'll try to keep this one on the down low.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks.
So that's it for today, folks. I know you're going to be joining me very, very soon. We have this podcast now almost every day of the working week, and I'm so excited to be with you more and more every day. I love reading your comments. I love looking at your responses on Twitter, on Instagram, your emails to me. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. Don't forget to download this podcast wherever you get your podcast. That's on Apple, Spotify, wherever. Go to YouTube, go to Rumble. I want to see those numbers go up. I know we can make it happen. And I have so many more great guests for you. So follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on Twitter at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. Folks, God bless you. God bless our great nation. And God bless the great state of Texas and Montenegro for that matter.